Well, welcome to week 3 of EDTECH537, blogging in the classroom. I'm glad you're still with us. You'll note that things are starting to pick up a little bit this week, although it's still a week away before we sort of get into more of the hardcore blogging activities. So we're still setting things up right now and getting sort of the framework, if you will, of your blog put in place. Looking at the readings, there are 2 readings for this week. The first one is O'Donnell, 2006. The second one is Lampshade, Berry, and Armstrong, 2002. The first one, O'Donnell, looks at the notion of how we can leverage blogging within the classroom as a good pedagogical tool. It's a relatively shorter reading that you've got. I think it's about 15 pages. And it actually, oddly enough, references some of the things that you've already read in this course, like the Downs 2004 article. Now, the Lampshade, Berry, and Armstrong one is a little bit different. Basically, it's a lengthy document. It's over 100 pages, and I don't expect you to read all 100 pages. In fact, as you can see here, there are certain parts that I'd like you to read, and then certain parts that you can sort of ignore, and then certain parts you can sort of just skim through to see if there's anything that interests you. So looking at it by section, basically the blog uses section, which is about 6 or 8 or so pages in, I think maybe 10 pages in. That's the first section that I want you to read, and if memory serves me correct, it's about 3 or 4 or 5 pages that you want to read through there that are actually good, I think, substantial, significant, useful content for the purposes of thinking about how you could use your blog in both an educational and a classroom-based context. Then there are a series of case studies there. Basically, look at the first page when they start to describe roughly what the case study is about and see if that matches up with what you have in mind for your own blog. If it does match up for what you have in mind with your own blog, read through that case study. If it doesn't, skip through to the next case study to see if that matches up with what you have in mind with your blog. The next section, so this is going to be, I think, the 5th section now, is entitled Uses of Blogs in Education and Training. Again, like the case study section, this is one to sort of skim through to see if there's anything there that kind of aligns with what you have in mind for how you might use your own blog in your educational context. If it is, then read through that particular section. If not, just keep skimming through. The rest of the document, so the final 5 sections of the document, are things that you can ignore because while they're kind of interesting if this is something that you're particularly interested in, they aren't necessarily relevant to, I think, just a general knowledge for this course. So you can skip over those sections. So when you look at it, there's not that much that you actually have to read. There's a little bit more that you can kind of skim through to see what might be of use to you and what might not be. But the vast majority of this document you can actually just outright ignore. So hopefully that'll sort of guide your reading as you go through this, because by no means do I expect you to read all 104 pages of this document. In terms of actually sort of developing our blog as we're going through, there's a couple of things that I want you to do. The first is a disclosure page. Now you'll note if you actually sort of skim through the FCC guidelines, one of the things that it talks about is a general disclosure page when you're looking at specific entries isn't enough to, you need to do more when you're talking about things. So one of the things that we'll talk about, and I'll actually post an example on my own blog this week, where I will actually blog about something that I need to disclose something about. And you'll see in the individual entry that I will include that specific disclosure statement. Now, in addition to that, I also have a general disclosure page, because I think that general disclosure page, while it isn't enough by FCC standards, is something that I think is quite useful. And from time to time, we're always going to forget once in a while to include that specific disclosure in the individual entry that we have. So having this more generalized disclosure page is useful to our readers to be able to understand potential biases that we might have. The second activity that you're going to be doing this week is actually sort of the first formal assignment that you're going to submit, and that's going to be this notion of getting permission. So you're actually going to write a letter of asking permission from your administrator, whoever that might be in your specific educational context. Obviously, if you're in the K-12 context, that becomes very simple because that's probably your principal or someone at the district level. If you're not in a K-12 context, this is a conversation that you and I want to have at the beginning of the week to find out who exactly would be appropriate for you to ask permission of as you're doing this kind of thing. For example, when I first joined Sacred Heart University back in August of 2013, so roughly 10 months ago, one of the things that I did when I joined the faculty was I talked to my dean about my blog and what I used my blog for and the types of things I posted on my blog, because, while my opinions aren't necessarily representative of the university, I'm not speaking on behalf of the university, because I'm a administrator within the university environment. I'm a faculty member at Sacred Heart University. Obviously, the types of things I post, even within the realms of academic freedom, still reflect upon the university. So I wanted him to be aware. It wasn't so much asking permission because of the whole notion of academic freedom, but I also didn't want him to be blindsided by something. So depending upon your educational context, that notion of getting permission may look very differently. If you're in the K-12 context, the way the assignment is actually written is probably quite useful to you. If you're not in the K-12 context, you and I need to have a conversation early in the week to figure out exactly who you're going to be asking permission of. And then something you're going to see from now on in each of the weekly items is this notion of microblogging. Essentially, you should be tweeting. What should you tweet? Well, that's really entirely up to you. You'll note if you look at my Twitter stream, one of the things I tweet is every time I post a blog entry, I'll send a tweet out that says, here's the title of the blog entry and here's the link for it. I'll also, retweet a lot of things that come across my electronic desk, particularly in my Twitter stream, that I think are important, that I want to pass on to my own followers. You'll see from time to time I'll interact with folks. But essentially you want to be, when you see that microblogging thing come across your screen, in each of these weekly introductions from now till the end of the semester, what you want to do is think, okay, well, I need to be using Twitter on a fairly regular basis as I move forward. So that's your introduction to week 3. As always, if you've got any questions, feel free to contact me. Email is always the best way of getting a hold of me, although, again, feel free to try to catch me on Skype or to give me a telephone call as well. And, I'll do my best to help you along and make sure we continue this journey together.